Thank you for joining us at the Roundtable.
Brought to you by Community Education Arts, a nonprofit organization based in Noblesville, Indiana.
I'm Alice Cavanis-Gober, president of CEArts.
And I'm Sarah E. Morin, secretary of CEArts. Let's sit down at the Roundtable.
Okay, next up, Patrick Kalahar sent us, we said in the awards, his first submission to our publication ever, and it's titled Rites of Passage. It's a prose piece. It's a little bit longer than some of the others, so we asked him to do an excerpt of it, which we know will just, make you guys all want to buy more books and share it with everybody. Patrick, we just loved this piece, but take it away with your excerpt and share some of Rites of Passage with us.
Okay, thank you very much. It's kind of a full circle. It's like a lot of writers. The material is elements of autobiography and elements of family history and then stuff just made up. But my father was a volunteer in World War II. He volunteered before the draft, and he went to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. And he was one of the very first in what barracks they built because they knew World War II was coming.
Oh.
And when I was in the infantry, I went to basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, and also was in the same World War II barracks, one of the last groups that went through before those barracks were torn down. So it's kind of full circle, and the things about the reunion are things that I experienced at a big family reunion, an annual family reunion, and things that would have happened in my father's time as a child. So all the little details are all authentic, and there's some really unusual stuff in the story that someone that was really steeped in the history of it would notice, but others might not. So they can be just little cookies for people to look into, like the OHIO that were painted like graffiti on walls. And I'll just say it doesn't stand for Ohio. So if someone wants to look into the history, that's an actual thing. Okay, here's the excerpt from Rites of Passage. Because of a slight injury, I'm sitting alone in one of the recently built basic training barracks of Fort Benning, Georgia, while the rest of my company of recruits are still training in the field. I think of red dust and red mud, the taste of it, the smell of it, the grit of it in my teeth, in my eyes, under my fingernails, and between my toes. As I sit alone in the barracks and consider the future, my thoughts keep returning to the past. I feel very young in this moment and in danger of fading away, lost and forgotten in the present terrors, unless I grasp and hold tightly to every memory. It is the summer of 1933, and I am 11 years old. My dog and I are walking down the main street of Royalton, a small village surrounded by farms, including the one I live on. On the main street and the square formed around it are the courthouse, the biggest building in the whole county, the old jail, and nearly all the businesses. There are more horses and wagons than cars, and some of the stores are closed and boarded because of the Depression. Each store window has the same small patriotic NRA poster in the window, even the closed stores. I don't know exactly what it means, but I hear my father and other men say it means recovery. Inside every open business is a portrait that says, "Our new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He is going to save the country," I hear the adults say, even the Republicans. My father writes stories for the weekly newspaper, And he and my mother and me and Zip, of course, live on my grandfather's farm. We're in town to buy supplies for the big Connaught family reunion. The whole extended Connaught family comes each summer from all over the country for the celebration. For a lot of them in these Depression years, it is the only thing they spend money on that is not an absolute necessity. Last year, a strange old man, very thin and shy, came all the way from the west coast of Ireland. He was one of my grandfather's uncles, and he was a priest. My father said he speaks mostly Gaelic, some English, and enough Latin to say the Mass and read from the Bible and the prayer book. He constantly smoked cigarettes that he rolled himself and drank Irish whiskey, neat, poured when anybody offered into a shot glass that he kept in the pocket of his clerical jacket. Zip and I dozed peacefully on the trip back from town to the farm, then spent the rest of the day and evening doing chores for whoever asked, whenever they could find us. We stayed hidden as much as possible. The big day dawned and the whole farm was bustling. The farmhouse and the barn were packed with close relatives, and the fields were filled with tents. The rich people, relatively speaking, stayed in boarding houses or hotels in Indianapolis, or drove their cars all night or early in the morning. My family arranged the tables and chairs and everything, and those living the closest supplied most of the food. The women and my father and grandfather were up well before dawn preparing food and refreshments, and the men slaughtered a pig and chickens for the big open fire roast. Pretty much all the men brought their own whiskey. The whole crowd, except some of the in-laws, were Irish after all. No one ever seemed to know who started it, but a few men always passed the hat, and everything from dimes to $20 bills were dropped in while all eyes turned skyward, taking great interest in the trees and the clouds. There were games and loud and raucous conversations punctuated with flailing arms and jabbing fingers, lewd and vulgar jokes, some anti-clerical, as only the Irish, that most Catholic of people could tell them, accompanied by almost hysterical laughter, like the din of Bedlam, as my Aunt May, who was a retired nun, would often say. These stories and jokes were always permitted because they were told with such charm and dancing eyes that no one could take offense. I rarely took part directly in any of the activities, content to listen and observe. There were two men that I particularly noticed all through the morning. They were clearly not relatives or part of the happy throng. They shook hands and talked with many of the men, but never when any women were around. Their gestures were secretive, and their smiles were tight and thin-lipped and never reached their darting eyes. I moved as close as I dared to listen and watch what was going on. The relatives all knew who I was and took no notice. The two strangers did notice, but clearly sized me up as no threat. I was 11 years old after all. They were talking Irish politics, and I heard things like Sinn Féin and IRA and Provos and death to all the black and tans and all the collaborators who were still in Ireland. Then one of my relatives looked around and handed one of the strangers a huge wad of money, and the stranger put it in his inside pocket of his suit. When he did so, I was almost sure I saw a gun in a shoulder holster. I acted like I was totally bored, kicked at a couple of rocks, and as casually as I could, I walked away, pretending to look for something more interesting. Just when I thought my encounter with the IRA was going to be the highlight of the reunion, if they didn't kill me, that is, I literally bumped into a girl who was about my age and very pretty. I'd seen her a number of times in the morning, and every time she looked in my direction, I was sure she smiled. But each time I quickly looked away, convinced she was looking at someone else or that she smiled at everyone.
Thank you, Patrick. That was fabulous. That was fabulous. This has been At the Round Table with Alice
and Sarah E.
of Community Education Arts.
Our nonprofit organization is based in Noblesville, Indiana. You can find us online at CEArts.org. We'd like to thank James Weston for writing our intro music and for his technical savvy.
Join us next time
at the Round Table.